It is my pleasure to announce our main speaker for tonight, Kim from Sondheim Film.
R-E-S-P-E-C-T, find out what it means to me. R-E-S-P-E-C-T, take out T-C-T. Sock it to me, 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 sock it to me. Just a little bit.
Wow. She said they were going to play a song. I didn't believe her. I didn't know it would be that one. My name's Kim, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm going to try and share with you like for 35 minutes, okay? I may go over a little bit, but maybe I'll go under. I don't know. Anyway, my sobriety date is July the 28th, 1989. I got sober here in Ventura, over off of Laurel Street, in a little building that was down in the basement. I went to that meeting. I went to meetings at Vista Del Mar. I went to meetings at the churches. I went to meetings everywhere. Everywhere. I came in here into these rooms, and I sat up against a wall at my very first meeting. And I remember identifying when they went around the room, and I identified as an alcoholic. And I remember the tears just streaming down my face, because that was the very first time that I had been completely honest with myself about what was going on with my life and what I had become. I had no idea that this journey was going to take me somewhere that was going to span now for over 35 years, and I've never gone back out. I'm what they call one of those candy-ass people that came in here so tore up that there was no going back for me anymore. I did not want what I had back out there. And I knew that if I did go back out there, that I was going to either be arrested, I was either going to be dead, or something really, really bad was going to happen to me. I grew up here in Oxnard, and my grandparents, Kevin is my cousin. His father is my dad's brother. I grew up here in Oxnard, and I went to high school here. I went to junior high school here. I went to school here, and I was raised here until in 2006 I left Ventura County. And the reason that I left Ventura County was I got a job as a paralegal with the Public Defender's Office in Riverside County, and I accepted that job out there. I stayed there for 18 years, and I just recently retired in 2023. So I've been retired now for a couple of years, and it was the best job that I could have ever had because I was able to touch so many people with that job. My life was something. When I was a kid, it was filled with a lot of drama. My dad was an alcoholic. My mother was Hispanic and my father was Japanese, and they met in Colorado after my grandparents were interned in the concentration camps. They were interned, and then they met in Colorado. And we came out here in 1958, which is the year that I was born, and my grandparents bought a nursery off of Cypress Road over there in Port Hueneme, and they grew celery plants and tomato plants, and for all the big farmers like Donlin Brothers and Namba Brothers and Hiji and all those big farmers that were out here at that time. There was a colony of them that were all, after they got out of the internment camp, they all clustered in a place called Brighton, Colorado, and then from Brighton, Colorado, they all transferred out here to California. And so you see a lot of Japanese farmers out here. Those are the ones that were all interned. My grandparents spoke nothing but Japanese, okay? I did not understand Japanese. My mother and my father spoke 3 different languages. He spoke English, Japanese, and Spanish. And from the age of about 7 till the age of 17, I was raised around these Japanese people because of this nursery. So at summertime, I would have to go and work at this nursery, and we had farmland all over the place. Where Kohl's is right now, where that Kohl's shopping center is, that was nothing but farmland there. We grew corn there. Back in the late 60s when Kevin was a baby. We had cornfields there that we grew corn there. You know, and I grew up in the fields. I know what it is to do a hard day's work in the fields, man. I really do, and it's not easy, you know. And these grandparents, they raised me, and at the end of the summer, after summer was over and we were getting ready to go back to school, they would give us an allotment of money that we had earned during the summer, and I would go buy my own school clothes and do that kind of stuff. You know, and I was raised around these people, and it was an interesting dynamic because my grandparent, Japanese grandparents, did not like my mother, who was Hispanic, because my father had an arranged marriage back in Japan, because in the 50s, that's what they did. They had arranged marriages. But he ended up getting her pregnant. My mother had 3 children, me, my brother, who's now deceased due to cancer, esophageal cancer, and then I have a little sister that's still here in Oxnard. In that home, I grew up with a lot of shame. There was violence in that home, and I remember kind of shutting down when I was a kid. I would see my father, who would be dragging my mother by the hair, dragging her down the hallway, and we would wake up. And I would hear her screams, and we would go and see what was going on. And what he said to us was, "Go back to bed, everything's okay." And when you tell a kid something like that, what happens is they're so fucking confused, and you get filled with shame, and you got a lot of secrets that you don't tell people about. I've never had people come to my house when I was a kid. We never had a birthday party. We never had any of that stuff going on. None of it. So when I grew up and I started finding this substance, I started finding this group of girls in high school that I would smoke cigarettes with and do that kind of stuff, and then I started drinking with them at the age of 17. My career in drinking and using lasted 13 years, and it was hardcore. It was every day, and it was using a substance from the morning until the wee hours of the night. And it took me into a cycle that I never, ever want to forget, ever. That was my bottom. And I came into Alcoholics Anonymous at the age of 29. And I knew that I did not want to go into that next decade being a drug addict and an alcoholic. I was working for a Superior Court judge up in Santa Barbara. I landed this great job up there, and I was what it was called an at-will employee with him, and I was his secretary. I was 24 years old when I started with him. And I stayed with him until he retired from 1984 up until 1998 he retired. And I stayed with that man, and my drinking and using was manageable at that time. I could manage it where I wouldn't miss work or anything like that. And then it started to proceed to get a little bit worse and a little bit worse and a little bit worse. So the first 3 years of my employment with him, I never missed a day of work, not one day of work. And then in 1985, 4, 5, 6, it started to kind of decline. And my drug addiction and my alcoholism really took off. And this was up in Santa Barbara where things were wild. You know, you could drink on the streets during Fiesta, and it was one giant party up there. And there were a lot of people, you know, around me that were into party favors and all that kind of stuff, and it just my drinking and using just escalated. And it got to the point, and it got so bad that at one point, I called in sick, and then about a week later, the phone got disconnected. The gas got turned off. The television was disconnected. My car got repossessed in the middle of the night, and I let all that shit go. I did it. I don't blame anybody else but myself for all of the stuff that happened to me. And it was amazing to me now that I look back, standing from this viewpoint, how far that drug addiction and that alcoholism will take, and how long it lasted, and it took from me everything that I was willing to give it. Everything, including my soul. Yeah. The big book, when I started reading that big book, when I first came into these rooms, I started reading that big book, and in that doctor's opinion, it talked about having had a spiritual experience. And in that spiritual experience, what I've come to find out is that I'm having a spiritual awakening that's going on in my life on a daily basis. And I'm starting to grow from this thing that's called alcoholism. And what I had to do was I had to admit that I was powerless and that my life had become unmanageable. Well, check, that was pretty easy. I could check that box real fast, you know? The insanity was another thing for me to look at, and that insanity was pretty simple too, because in my days out there, what was going on for me was I was seeing people across the street, and they were hiding in the trees, and they were doing things, and I was losing it. I mean, absolutely losing it. I was on Hearst Street in Ventura, and I would go up to H&H Liquor at 6 o'clock in the morning. Now, you're a real alcoholic if you're at the liquor store at 6 o'clock in the morning with a handful of change, getting a couple of beers. And I didn't think anything of it at that time. I knew that I was filled with shame because I would not look that man in the eye, and yet he knew what was going on with me. He could tell who's at the liquor store at 8 o'clock, at 6 o'clock in the morning getting beers, you know? And my life had just completely gone crazy and off the rails. So as I looked at that second step, my life started to make sense, and it's like the unmanageability that took place and the insanity that took place in my life. I could see it. That wasn't hard for me to do at all. You know, and as I got into more about alcoholism, and in that chapter it says, most of us have been unwilling to admit that we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think that he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows, therefore non-alcoholic. For years I had been fooling myself. For years. For decades. You know, and it's just like I couldn't go on living like that anymore. And that book meant something to me. Those words meant something to me when I read them. And I knew what was going to happen to me if I didn't stop doing what I was doing. Now, I'm working for this judge up there, and my road is getting really narrow, okay? It's getting really, really narrow. And I'm still in the midst of my disease, because this was from 84 to 89. I'm in the midst of my disease. There was a retired sheriff's officer from LAPD who got assigned to be my deputy in the courtroom. Now, this man came in to introduce himself to me and the judge, and he looked at me and I looked at him, and I knew exactly what he thought of me. He knew exactly what I was, and I knew it. And I knew that that road was getting narrow. God was giving me signs along the way that you better watch out, girl, because your road is getting really thin here. You know, and one night I have this dream, and in this dream he's knocking on my door. And I pull the blinds back, and I see him standing there, and he says to me, "We're going to take you in." And that to me was a spiritual awakening again one more time, that you know what, if you don't stop doing what you're doing, you're going to end up somewhere that you don't want to be. And that's when I came and started coming into these rooms, and I've never left. I've never left. It'll be 36 years next month, and I've never stopped coming to meetings. I just haven't, because I like the way I feel in my skin suit today. When you first come into Alcoholics Anonymous, and welcome to you newcomers that are here for the first time or the second time or whatever it is, your skin suit does not feel right. When you are coming off and detoxing off of drugs and alcohol, you want to climb out of your skin, and I know what that feeling is like. My skin suit did not feel right for the first probably 6-7 months. 6-7 months it took because of the withdrawal from the drugs and the alcohol, and it's hardcore when you do it by yourself. I didn't go to some treatment center because I knew that if I went to a treatment center, they were going to know that there was something wrong with me because I'd be gone for 28 days. And remember, I'm an at-will employee for this judge, and I can't leave for 28 days. My job and my life is going to be over. So I came into rooms. And I went to rooms and rooms and rooms and rooms, and I kept going to meetings, man. And I remember them telling me, after one of my meetings, they said to me, "Kim, you don't ever have to drink and use again, and even if you want to, you don't have to." And I had never heard that before, and I thought, geez, these people are smart. You know, they're saying stuff like that. That kind of like, wow, I'd never heard that before. When you're out there and drinking and using in that world, you don't know certain things. You don't. When you come into Alcoholics Anonymous, there is a different language in here, and it is the language of the heart, where people talk to you and they tell you things. and they'll tell you the truth. And that's what they told me. They told me the truth. They told me, if you don't stop doing what you're doing, your life's never going to get better. And I knew it. I knew it. When I looked into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a lot of stuff that stands out to me when I'm in the process of working those steps. And in the beginning of that fourth step, I remember looking at that resentment. And when I started to list those people, places, and institutions, I remember the power that those resentments once had over me. And as I started to write them out, they started to lose power. And I thought, my God, because it made me come back and look at me. And what it asked me was, where had you been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, or frightened? What was my part? What was my part in this stuff? Because I had a big part. And I didn't want to hold anybody hostage anymore. I wanted to be rid of that stuff. I didn't want to resent my dad anymore. I didn't want to resent my mom. I didn't want to resent a lot of things that I thought that I had held on to. I just didn't want that burden anymore. We come in here with some heavy rocks that we carry around, and it's that shame and that guilt and all of that remorse and all of that pain that we lug around, that we keep anesthetizing ourselves one more time, until it quits working. And the solution is in those steps. That's what it is. It's a program of action, and I'm so glad that I found the program of action laid out in that first 164 pages. When I did that fourth step and I looked at those fears, and I listed those fears, even though I had no connection with resentments or any of that stuff, it just asked me very plainly to list your fears. And it promised me that, and it made me look one more time at myself, because in that third step, I had found out that self-reliance was my problem. I had been the actress who had always been running the show, trying to control everything. The ballet, the lights, all of that shit. If it would only just go my way, everything would be okay. And then when it didn't, I got angry and indignant. What a place to be. I learned not to live like that anymore. And I'm grateful for that, because I can catch myself with those character defects today. But when I looked at those fears, it promised me, it said, your self-reliance has failed you. And it said, to the extent that we rely on him, does he enable us to match calamity with serenity? I was like, wow. So if I rely on God to take these fears away from me, what he's going to promise me is that I'm going to have serenity in place of that stuff. And I started learning about those things. We don't know these things when we come in here. I'd never heard about a resentment. I knew I hated people, but I didn't know they had a special name for it called resentment. I had no idea. No idea that they had this stuff, and it's like, oh my God. There's so much in that big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and even 36 years later when I'm reading it, 35 years later when I'm reading it with the girls that I sponsor, I tell them, if you want me to sponsor you, better be ready to go page by page through that big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because if you're not, I'm not the one for you, because that's how I do it. Plain and simple. It's just the way I was raised, that's the way I do it. And they've sat with me. One of my little babies just took a year chip last week, and then I've got another one taking a year chip in July, like around the 5th or the 6th of July. She'll be turning a year. My oldest baby is 33 years old, and she's up in Washington, and another one is up in Santa Barbara. These are the gifts that we get from being in Alcoholics Anonymous, is being able to watch other women to recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, and to watch them create lives that they never thought were possible. What a miracle, to have hope where there's no hope. Because when you first come in here, there's no hope. It seems so hopeless. But if you let these people surround you and love you and welcome you, and you keep coming back, something's going to shift and change inside of you. It's going to shift and change. You're going to find a fellowship in here that's beyond your wildest dreams. Beyond your wildest dreams. And the book says that we don't normally mix well. Yeah, but when we come into Alcoholics Anonymous, We have one common denominator, and that is alcoholism. Alcoholism. The book says it's a spiritual life is not a theory, we have to live it. And I get to live this way today more than anything. I get to practice these principles in all of my affairs, not only with my husband at home, with my family, with my work life or friends or whatever it is. I get to practice that stuff in there. That's why we have principles in groups and that kind of stuff. Those principles are important. You know, this morning in the daily reflection, the reading was about having faith over fear. And in that reading, it talked about the freedom. And all I wanted in the beginning of my sobriety was for this thing to shut up. Because it got up before me in the morning and it would tell me all kinds of crazy things and it would start planning out my day. You know, and all I wanted it to do was just be quiet. And I called it K-Fuck because it was like a radio station that it would just turn on in the morning, you know, and it was like, oh my God, there's K-Fuck again. And I would have to shut it up, and I would just have to tell it, you know, that I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to listen to you. And what I learned, what I've come to learn in here is that the book says that what once was the guiding force is cast aside, and a whole new conception comes in. So my ideas, my attitude, my emotions start to change in here. And I start to re-educate myself. I am reborn, the book talks about, and that's what happens to us. I feel like I've lived this lifetime two people, one of a drunken drug addict alcoholic and one of a spiritual person who's trying to do better every day, because I only have a daily reprieve contingent upon the maintenance of my spiritual condition. I'm not granted tomorrow. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know what's going to happen an hour from today, from now. But I do know that right now, if I stay right here on the right now, I'm in a room filled with alcoholics, you know, and I'm here to share my experience, strength, and hope. Alcoholics is Anonymous is the best thing that's ever happened to me, ever. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart, because I had a soul sickness like they talk about in the big book. I had a spiritual malady that was so deep and so twisted that I had no idea that what I needed to do was I needed to look inside of myself. Because inside, with the help of God, that the answers would come. And they have. And they still do. Just because you get time in here doesn't mean you stop growing. Never, ever. I don't know everything, and there's little things that I do know, and there's certain things that I don't know. You know, and it's okay to say, I don't know. All I can say to some of the women when they come to me with some problems that are beyond them and beyond me is that we have to pray about it. We get to pause and we get to pray about these things. And then maybe we'll proceed on something. You know, maybe we need to do some work here. That fifth step, you know, when you look at that, I'm going to go over the little sexual inventory because a lot of us are warped like that. I know I was, you know. I was a floozy when I was out there. Not a pretty thing. It's just the reality of it. You know, it's what happens when you mix alcohol and men and women and bars and all that kind of shit. It just happens, you know, and there's a lot of stuff that I did that I'm not proud of. But I get to relive that. I get to redo that stuff today. And I get to live a better life today. And I have morals today. Back then I didn't have morals. I didn't have any of that stuff. None of it. It was all gone when that drink and that bar closed, let me tell you. You know, it's just the shit that we do when we're out there drinking and using. The reality of it. I'm not ashamed of it anymore. It doesn't own me anymore. I don't do that stuff anymore. That's why. You know. But we let God take us to better things. That's what the book says. I didn't meet my husband until I was 17 years sober. And when I met him up in Santa Barbara at an AA meeting up there. And I'll tell you a little something weird little story about that. One night I had this dream. And in this dream, I was at a party. Beautiful teak floors at this house, and there was a step. And on that step, this man walked in with gray hair and he had like a gray turtleneck on. And I remember in my dream, all the words that they said to me was, "Find him." And I'll be goddamn if that man didn't walk into the Alano Club in Santa Barbara at an AA meeting. And I found him, and I married him 6 months later. And we're still together. We're still together. You know, and that man is my rock. He looks out for me. He's got my best interest at heart. He's there for me. He loves me beyond my wildest dreams. And sometimes I have to make amends to that man, you know, and that's hard when you're married, right? It's hard sometimes. You have to make amends to people. It's not easy, but I do it. I take that bit in my teeth and I go to him and I say, "You know what? I was wrong for saying that. I was wrong. Or I won't treat you that way again." That's how I learn in here. I learn from my mistakes. There's not a book, there's not a manual, there's not any of that stuff out there. We come in here and we learn and we listen. In that sixth step, this month is the sixth, it's June, and it's all about the character defects, and it's all about the sixth tradition, you know. And every morning at my morning meeting, I go to a 7 a.m. meeting every morning. And I'm part of that group. That's the Arid Club in San Jacinto in Hammock, California. So if you're ever out, we have meetings there at this clubhouse, and you're more than welcome to come and join us. You know, it's a great meeting, and there's people in there that are on the same path. We come in with a collective consciousness, and we're all growing. We're all growing spiritually, and we're all there to listen and to learn. And that's what it is. And every morning we read that daily reflections, and we share on it. Now, some people go off a little track, you know, and that's okay, whatever it is. You know, they get to share their whatever's going on with them, but they share in a general way. When you do those steps, man, that seventh step, you know, when you're into that seventh step, those character defects and those shortcomings, that I go into the 12 and 12 with my girls. Because in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's just a short little paragraph in there. So I want more in depth. So we go through the 12 and 12, and in there it talks about your character defects, and it says at no point does God render us white as snow. It is something that I have to obtain every day. I have to work towards this stuff every day because those character defects are there. They're going to be sometimes at bay and sometimes put into a little corner, or maybe I don't have to work on that stuff today or whatever it is, but it's, for some reason, those character defects are always there with me, and I have to learn how to deal with them. I have to, you know. From that eighth step, I'm going to pull out of that fifth step, right? I'm going to make my amends to those people that I thought that I harmed, or I need those institutions, and I need to pay back that money that I borrowed from the bank or credit cards or whatever it is. I've paid out debt 3 times in this program in the last 30 years because I like credit. And credit is something that you have to learn to deal with. And today, for me, more than anything, it's about having cash in hand, and that's it. I don't live with credit cards anymore. Before I retired, my plan and my goal was a 2-year plan was to pay off all of my debts, and I did it. I paid over probably $15,000 in debt before I retired because I wanted those checks to come into my pocket and not leave my pocket. That was what I wanted, and that's what I did. I set a little thing for me, and I obtained it, you know, a little goal. Those character defects, I mean, the 8th step, when I did my letter to my dad, and I told him how sorry I was because what I had come to find out was that my dad was an alcoholic just like me. But see, I didn't understand that. When you're a kid, you don't understand that stuff. And it pained me in my heart. And I had written out, you know, that I loved him and all of that stuff. And I was sorry for what he had become and what everything that had happened and transpired into our lives. Well, when my dad passed away, he had all of the cards. We went to his house to clean out the stuff at my grandparents' nursery. He was living there. He had a little Sears box candy, and inside that Sears box candy was that letter that I wrote him and all the cards that we had ever given him. He had saved them all. You know, to have that peace inside and that freedom today that I don't have to walk around in shame anymore. No more. I don't have that baggage anymore. I'm not I'm not ashamed of who I am today. I know more than anything I'm an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic on a daily basis, and I live with that today, and that I live in a spiritual solution today more than anything. Every morning I get up, I go outside, I talk to God, I read that meditation book, I feed my cats. You know, I get ready to go to my meeting when we do what we need to do there, and then I come back, and the day is mine. I can do whatever I want because I'm retired. I let people pass me on the highway today because I don't care. You can go around me, you gotta go to work, I don't. You know, I don't have to go to work anymore. I'm so grateful for that. You know, those are the benefits of being and staying sober and living the good life today more than anything. We reap the rewards. And some of those rewards you can't buy with money. You cannot. Respect, love, integrity, tolerance, kindness, patience. Don't ever pray for patience. You'll get it. I remember one time I prayed for patience. I was working on that thing, right? And so I prayed for patience. I went to go see a guy that, because in the public defender's office, I was assigned to work with people who were, back then they had the death penalty, and he was facing the death penalty. He had shot his kid in the head, and then he shot his wife in the head, and he was on a death penalty case. And I had gone to visit him that day, and that morning I had prayed for patience. I sat in that holding cell waiting for him in the attorney booth holding cell for over an hour, and I learned patience that day. I've never prayed for it since, ever. So be careful what you pray for, because it comes fast. You know, when we look at that 10th step, when I look at the 10th step, for me, that 10th step is continuing, you know, to take a personal inventory, and when I'm wrong, I promptly admit it. That's what I'm keeping my house clean, because this program has taught me that it's about trusting God, cleaning house, and working with others, right? That's what it's about. And if I do that stuff, and if I pray in the morning, and if I pray at night, and I keep my house clean throughout the day, and my inventory is good, and I do those spot checks, if I've crossed somebody or I've said something wrong or whatever it is, do I need to do a spot check? Where was I wrong? What do I need? How do I remedy it? These are good guides to live by, and I wish everybody in the world had them, but they don't. So we are the chosen ones that get to give this gift away. You know? And some will carry it to their families, some will carry it to other alcoholics, but we get to live these things, these virtues that we have today more than anything. Alcoholics Anonymous is an amazing program. And all you have to do is come in here completely fucking tore up, right? Completely fucking tore up. And then something happens to your life. You know, you start to change. You start to accept the fact that maybe you're an alcoholic or you're a drug addict. And then maybe some of these people can help you. And they do. They do. For free. They say Alcoholics Anonymous is a program shoved up your ass 5 cents at a time. That's what they say in Hemet. I don't know if it's true or not, but you know, that's what they say. Anyway, you know, that 10th step is something that's for me. It is for me to look at myself one more time every day on a daily basis, because it is that daily reprieve contingent upon the maintenance of my spiritual condition. How am I today? What am I doing right? What am I doing? What do I need to change? You know? Sought through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact. My God. I have been on a quest for the last 35 years, and it has taken me inside of myself. That is where I find God, inside of myself. I've gone to church. I don't knock that stuff. If people want to go to church and they need to do that, you feel free to do it. But for me, I've gone there and I've always come back to Alcoholics Anonymous, because this is something that works for me. This is a spiritual program. Spiritual, meaning on the inside of me. You know? It's an amazing journey. So when I take a look at that 11th step, you know, I'm reviewing and doing all of that stuff, and I'm seeking through meditation, and I'm doing all of this stuff. And I remember one night I lived on Her Street, and I was just maybe about 5 or 6 months sober, and I remember I was laying in bed that night, and I remember this big ball of freaking pink light came into my room, and it filled my room, and I don't know why. I don't know why. And I shot up out of my bed, and I looked at this pink light, and I remember these words coming from it saying, peace. That's all it said to me, and then it disappeared. I'm on this meditation path, right, and I'm seeking this stuff now. I'm really into it. I'm up in Santa Barbara, and there's all the hippies up there and all the new age stuff and all of that stuff up there. Well, I go to this little place called Paradise. It was Paradise Found, I think it was. It was on off of Anacapa Street. And I went into this little place, and they had little 8-track, or not 8-tracks, but cassette tapes that you could put in. And so at lunchtime, I would go over there, and I would sit down, and they had these headphones, put the tape in there, and I would meditate, and I would learn to meditate that stuff. Because it quiets this thing down. I had to quiet it down. It was yakking all the time. And so I'm sitting in that chair, and I've got these headphones on, and I look up, and all of a sudden I see this picture of Jesus, and it has this big ball of pink light, and it's called the Ascension. And it was an amazing picture, and I saw that, and I was like, oh my God, was he in my room? But I guess he was. I don't know. I still don't know. I have a question for that. So when I go home, I'm going to ask him, what was that ball of light that you brought to me? I have no idea. But it's always been a quest for me ever since I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, is to keep seeking God and to keep seeking different things in here, different modalities of healing and eating the right food and all of that stuff that comes with it, because, we have to take care of this body. We only get one. I talk about the dash, and that dash is the date from your birthday, the day that you were born, the dash, and then your end date. What are you going to do with that dash? How are you going to fill it? How are you going to live? Do you push your shopping cart back in when you finish your groceries? I do. People laugh at me, but I don't care. I do it. I push that shopping cart in. Am I kind to other people? Most of the time. There's sometimes I'm not, and I have to make amends for that stuff because I get to do that today. Having had that spiritual awakening, that's what this thing is all about for me. I get to carry this message of Alcoholics Anonymous, telling these newcomers, those men back there, that this thing works. This program works. This is a program of recovery, and it is laid out in the first 164 pages. Get a big book. Find a trusted friend, and join us on the broad highway so that we can walk hand in hand with you, and that you can recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body like a lot of us have in here. Thanks.